When we look back at our early 20th century ancestors, it's easy to picture a generation of stiff, unsmiling figures staring sternly out of black and white photographs. We tend to imagine them as perfectly pious and painfully serious. But Chester Lawrence Brown was none of those things. His own poetry tells a different story. In a poem he titled Organic Cheese, Chester wrote about a natural acrobat who tried to walk on his hands in the edge of the vat. He was documenting a disaster at his family's cheese factory. His older brother decided the rim of a boiling vat of curds and whey was the perfect place to practice a handstand. The acrobat slipped, and down into the hot cheese he sailed. Chester was the little brother watching this unfold. When his brother climbed out of the pot looking like a half-drowned dog, their mother came running. To cover up his own uncontrollable laughter, Chester instantly challenged his soaking wet brother to a quick water fight. To see how this mischievous boy became a community pillar, we have to trace the life documented between the lines of his poetry. Chester's childhood was spent far off the grid. Before he turned 3, his family moved to Chuichupa, a tiny, rugged community high up on the far tip of the Sierra Madre Mountains in Mexico. It was a harsh environment, which he later captured in a poem about their seasonal cattle drives. He wrote about a morning when his father brought a sealed bottle of beef to feed the hungry ranch hands. When they popped the lid, the smell of meat that had been rotting for months sent the defeated men rushing for the cabin door. You had to be physically tough to survive up there. During a 24th of July celebration, a severe hailstorm drove everyone inside the local chapel. Chester was standing in the foyer when lightning struck the steeple, knocking him completely unconscious. The local first aid method was to drag him outside and lay him in a puddle of hail water to pull the electricity out of his body. That wasn't his only run-in with high voltage. One of his daily chores was herding cows down a narrow lane lined with barbed wire. During the heavy monsoon rains, lightning would strike the wire and travel straight down the fence line, shocking Chester so frequently that people started calling him Ever-Ready. But the mountains also taught him deep compassion. His uncle gave him an old, cast-off horse with a slight limp on its back leg. Chester named him Spider. Spider became his absolute pride and joy, a fiercely loyal companion who once followed a crying, injured Chester all the way home after a bad riding accident. Growing up in that wild, unpredictable terrain forged a specific kind of resilience. Chester learned early on to brush off literal shocks, survive dangerous accidents, and find the humor in the chaos. By the time he reached young adulthood, Chester had moved to Arizona, where his high-energy spirit found a new focus. At a local church meeting, he offered a ride home to a young woman named Clea. That single car ride sparked a courtship that evolved into a marriage that lasted a lifetime. Even their honeymoon had that classic Chester humor. They took a road trip to tour the Grand Canyons of the Southwest. Clea was still learning how to drive, and the long, open desert road seemed like the perfect practice ground. Until Chester casually pointed out she was blasting down the highway at 75 miles an hour. Their carefree new life was quickly interrupted by the reality of World War II. Knowing he was likely to be drafted, Chester took matters into his own hands and proactively enlisted in the United States Navy, leaving his wife and their first young son behind. The military recognized his mechanical aptitude. He was sent to Shell Beach, Louisiana, where he was assigned as a gunner's mate instructor. His daily responsibility was to train recruits on the complex, highly technical mechanics of anti-aircraft guns until the war finally ended. The same hands that once herded pigs and rode limping horses in Mexico were now responsible for the precision maintenance of heavy weaponry. When his country required it, Chester traded the freedom of the mountains for the rigid, technical structure of national duty. After his discharge, Chester and Clea settled in the Benson, Arizona area. They purchased a small farm and, from the ground up, built a family dairy operation that eventually required the daily help of all 6 of their children. Chester looked past the day-to-day work of traditional farming to address the rising costs threatening the local industry. He helped form the Cochise County Dairy Herd Improvement Association, pooling resources with other dairymen to find a modern solution to their shared economic struggle. This diagram shows the logic behind the change. By introducing artificial insemination, the process of manually breeding cows, and carefully selecting high-yield genetics from purebred Holsteins, a single superior genetic line multiplied milk output across their small herds. This calculated innovation saved the local dairies. Between the dawn-to-dusk physical labor of the farm and raising his 6 kids, Chester's schedule was grueling. Yet he still took on immense community responsibilities, serving in local church leadership for over a decade, including 4 years as a bishop. The restless energy that once got him into trouble in the mountains was now channeled into a relentless, structured drive to provide for his family and build up the people around him. As Chester entered his later years, his poetry moved away from pure humor. He kept writing, but his verses became more vulnerable and reflective. In a poem he titled Sincerely, he addressed his younger self. "It wasn't always that way, I should tell the truth. I made careless mistakes in the days of my youth. I can tell my feelings in one short sentence. I hope I have ample time to finish my repentance." He spent his remaining decades actively living out that faith. He and Clea accepted multiple church missions, doing everything from teaching the gospel in Florida to the tedious work of extracting thousands of names from 1800 Spanish records. At 90 years old, Chester penned another verse reflecting on his unlikely survival. He noted the terrible odds of being dragged by horses and struck by lightning, directly attributing his long life to his strict observation of the word of wisdom, his faith's code of health. Chester's legacy rests on that ever-ready spirit, the ability to admit past flaws with a smile, love his family deeply, and work with genuine joy until the very end.